The sun rose over the undulating hills of eastern Anatolia, casting long shadows over valleys that would soon become the stage for one of history's most fateful encounters. It was the year 1071, a year that would etch itself into the annals of empires, a year when the world would witness the collision of two formidable forces, each representing the zenith of its own civilization. On one side stood the Byzantines, heirs of Rome's grandeur, wielding the authority of an empire that had endured centuries of conquest and transformation. Their banners, adorned with the double-headed eagle, fluttered in the wind as disciplined legions armored in glinting steel marched with the precision that had once subdued the known world. On the other side loomed the Seljuks, a rising power from the steppes of Central Asia, nomadic warriors turned conquerors, moving with the speed and unpredictability of the desert wind. Their cavalry, swift and disciplined, had already carved out a vast dominion across Persia and the Levant, and now their eyes were set on Anatolia, the rich heartland of the Byzantine realm. The path to this fateful confrontation had been paved over decades of political maneuvering, border skirmishes, and an ever-shifting tapestry of alliances. The Byzantine Empire, though mighty, had begun to show cracks in its armor. Internal rivalries among generals, a weakened economy, and a series of mismanaged campaigns against the Turks and other neighboring powers had sown seeds of instability. Meanwhile, the Seljuks, under the leadership of the brilliant Sultan Alp Arslan, had consolidated their authority with ruthless efficiency. Alp Arslan, whose name would echo through history as the architect of one of the greatest victories of the medieval era, combined the cunning of a statesman with the ferocity of a warrior. He understood the power of psychological warfare, the importance of terrain, and the advantage of mobility in the open plains and mountainous corridors of Anatolia. By the early summer, both forces had maneuvered into position near the town of Manzikert. For the Byzantines, led by Emperor Romanos IV of Diogenes, the campaign was intended as a decisive strike, a show of force that would secure the eastern frontier and reaffirm imperial prestige. Romanos, a seasoned soldier of noble lineage, believed in the discipline and superiority of his forces, confident that well-trained heavy infantry and cataphracts would overcome any challenge. Yet confidence can be a double-edged sword. Overconfidence, combined with the underestimation of an enemy whose tactics were unconventional and unpredictable, would prove perilous. The days before the battle were a delicate dance of reconnaissance and skirmishes. Byzantine scouts reported sightings of Seljuk cavalry moving in patterns that were difficult to interpret, striking and withdrawing, leaving only questions in their wake. Romanos attempted to secure supply lines, fortify positions, and draw the Seljuks into a direct confrontation where his superior infantry could dominate. Alp Arslan, conversely, avoided giving away the full strength of his forces, using feints and retreats to stretch Byzantine patience and expose weaknesses. The tension was palpable. Soldiers on both sides sensed that the coming clash would not merely be another encounter, but a confrontation whose outcome could redefine borders, power, and destiny. When the armies finally met, the terrain itself seemed to conspire with the Seljuks. Rolling hills, sparse forests, and hidden valleys became instruments of strategy. The Byzantine army, massive and heavily armored, advanced with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Cataphracts thundered at the front, their lances poised to pierce any formation, while infantry held lines that had been perfected over centuries. Yet the Seljuks, nimble and adaptive, avoided head-on engagement. Their horse archers, masters of mobility, loosed volleys of arrows while retreating, drawing the Byzantines further from their strong positions, forcing them into open fields where the Seljuks' speed could be fully leveraged. As the sun reached its zenith, the battle unfolded with a ferocity that would haunt both sides for generations. Arrows darkened the sky, spears clashed with shields, and the thunder of hooves echoed like a drum of doom across the valley. Byzantine units, disciplined and unyielding, fought with valor, Yet every charge seemed anticipated, every maneuver countered. Alp Arslan's forces exploited every misstep, creating pockets of chaos within the Byzantine ranks. In the midst of the chaos, betrayal whispered from within. Some Byzantine commanders, motivated by rivalries or doubts, hesitated, failing to reinforce critical positions. Such fissures, invisible to the casual observer, would determine the battle's outcome. By evening, the field bore the scars of relentless combat. The Byzantines, once a disciplined phalanx of imperial might, were fractured, their formations disrupted by relentless cavalry strikes and tactical cunning. Emperor Romanos, witnessing the unraveling of his army, attempted a desperate regroup, rallying units and issuing commands that were drowned in the din of battle. Alp Arslan, commanding with calm precision, recognized the moment of decisive advantage. A final sweep of Seljuk horsemen enveloped the Byzantine forces, cutting off retreat and striking with merciless accuracy. What had begun as a disciplined engagement devolved into a chaotic rout. The emperor himself was captured, a symbol of imperial authority rendered powerless before a rising conqueror. The consequences of Manzikert rippled far beyond the battlefield. Anatolia, once the secure heartland of Byzantium, became vulnerable to Seljuk incursions. Villages were abandoned, cities fortified in fear, and the psychological shock of defeat reverberated through Constantinople. Romanos's capture sparked political upheaval, destabilizing an empire already grappling with internal divisions. Meanwhile, the Seljuks, emboldened by victory, solidified their presence in the region, establishing footholds that would eventually transform the demographic, cultural, and political landscape of Anatolia. Yet the Battle of Manzikert was not merely a tale of military tactics or territorial conquest. It was a crucible where the fates of empires were tested, where the arrogance of overconfidence met the ingenuity of a rising power. The clash illustrated the limits of traditional military doctrine against adaptive mobile strategies. It revealed how leadership, terrain, and morale could outweigh sheer numbers or armor. And in the broader sweep of history, it signaled the slow but inexorable decline of Byzantium's eastern dominance, while heralding the ascent of Turkic influence that would shape the medieval Middle East for centuries. The Seljuks themselves, despite victory, understood that conquest was only the first step. Governing newly acquired lands, integrating diverse populations, and managing relations with neighboring powers required diplomacy as deft as their skill in warfare. Alp Arslan's vision extended beyond mere battlefield triumph. He sought to transform victories into lasting power, to establish a legacy that would endure through generations. His combination of martial skill, political acumen, and strategic foresight would inspire successors, shaping the region long after the echoes of Manzikert faded from the valley. And so, as the sun set over the blood-soaked plains of Manzikert, the world stood at a precipice. Byzantium, shaken and humbled, would never regain the unchallenged control it once exercised over Anatolia. The Seljuks, riding the momentum of triumph, would lay foundations that future empires, Ottoman and otherwise, would inherit. The battle was a pivot, a fulcrum upon which the destiny of nations teetered, illustrating the fragile balance between power and hubris, strategy and chance, ambition and consequence. The dawn after Manzikert was a scene of grim reckoning. The valley, once alive with the banners of empire and the thunder of hooves, now lay strewn with remnants of what had been a great Byzantine force. Broken shields glinted in the early light, arrows protruded from the bodies of soldiers, frozen in their last desperate gestures, and the stench of smoke and blood clung to the air. Survivors stumbled through the wreckage, their armor torn, their faces etched with disbelief. Some wandered aimlessly, unable to grasp how the mightiest army of the East had fallen to a force that, not long ago, would have seemed an upstart menace. Emperor Romanos IV of Diogenes, captured and humbled, was brought before Alp Arslan, the architect of his undoing. The Seljuk Sultan, tall and imposing, yet calm, regarded his prisoner with a mixture of respect and calculation. The meeting, though tense, was not marked by immediate brutality. Alp Arslan understood the symbolic power of his actions. A victorious general does not merely crush his enemy. He demonstrates mastery, balance, and foresight. To execute a captured emperor on the field might have served immediate vengeance, but it risked painting the Seljuks as mere conquerors, stripping them of legitimacy. Instead, Alp Arslan displayed a calculated magnanimity, negotiating terms that would humiliate Romanos, yet preserve the Seljuks' growing reputation as a disciplined and formidable power. The emperor, stripped of authority yet treated with a measure of dignity, became a living testament to the Seljuk supremacy. The very act of his capture shattered the psychological foundations of Byzantine authority. Across Constantinople, rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered of divine judgment, others of incompetence and betrayal, and still others feared the unstoppable momentum of the Seljuks. Political factions within the capital seized upon the emperor's absence to further their own ambitions, and the internal fractures that had long simmered now erupted into open contention. Romanos' capture was not merely a personal loss. It was a destabilizing force that rippled through every corner of an already strained empire. Yet the battlefield itself told stories that no chronicler could fully capture. The Seljuk cavalry, whose movements had seemed chaotic to untrained eyes, now revealed the brilliance of their strategy. Horse archers had danced across the slopes and ridges, striking and withdrawing with precise timing, creating illusions of retreat and weakness. The Byzantine response, guided by rigid formations and conventional doctrine, had fallen perfectly into the trap. Heavy infantry became isolated, cataphracts found themselves overextended, and units that might have been decisive were caught in confusion. Each Seljuk maneuver was a lesson in patience and deception, in the orchestration of forces not by brute strength alone, but by understanding the interplay of psychology, terrain, and timing. Within the Byzantine ranks, tales of heroism were intertwined with tragedy. Some generals fought to their last breath, rallying broken units against overwhelming odds. Soldiers who had trained for decades, who had carried the legacy of Rome in their armor and hearts, faced a reality they could scarcely comprehend. The clash of sword and shield, the relentless pounding of hooves, the ceaseless whistling of arrows, these were the symphony of an empire's sudden vulnerability. Personal bravery, however, could not compensate for strategic miscalculations and internal disunity. By mid-afternoon, the Byzantine forces were not merely retreating, they were unraveling, fragmented into pockets of resistance that would either surrender or perish in the coming hours. Meanwhile, the Seljuks, disciplined yet fluid, pressed their advantage without cruelty beyond necessity. Their tactics reflected a philosophy that saw war as an extension of intelligence, patience, and adaptability. Alp Arslan himself rode among the troops, observing, correcting, and inspiring. His leadership was not the bluster of a conqueror, but the quiet authority of one who understood that victory was earned not in moments of rage, but through measured, decisive action. Reports later recounted how he saved units from unnecessary slaughter, redirected attacks to exploit critical weaknesses, and maintained a cohesion among his forces that belied their nomadic origins. This mastery of command would become a hallmark of Seljuk strategy for generations. As the dust settled, Anatolia itself seemed transformed. Villages that had once thrived under Byzantine administration now lay vulnerable, their inhabitants fearful of the new order. Trade routes, military garrisons, and fortifications all had to be reconsidered in the wake of the defeat. For the Seljuks, victory on the battlefield was only the beginning. Consolidating power over a conquered region required a different kind of skill. Administrators, local allies and military governors were needed to secure borders, integrate populations, and extract resources without alienating the very people whose cooperation was necessary for long-term dominance. Alp Arslan's triumph was thus as much political as it was martial, a blueprint for empire building rooted in both pragmatism and vision. Back in Constantinople, the implications of Manzikert spread like wildfire. Court intrigue intensified, and the emperor's absence created a power vacuum exploited by ambitious nobles. Factions vied for control, forging alliances and betrayals that would reverberate through Byzantine history. The defeat forced a re-evaluation of military doctrine, highlighting the dangers of complacency and the need to adapt to new forms of warfare. Heavy reliance on traditional formations and elite infantry, once the backbone of Byzantine might, was shown to be vulnerable to the rapid mobile tactics of the Seljuks. Military reform became not merely desirable but essential, though internal divisions often hampered coherent action. For the common people of Anatolia, the Battle of Manzikert was transformative in ways that were neither immediate nor entirely visible at first. The Seljuk presence brought new languages, cultures, and administrative structures into areas long dominated by Byzantium. Over time, towns and cities adapted to a new order, blending local traditions with the influences of a rising power that would shape architecture, governance, and daily life. Trade, agriculture, and religious institutions adjusted, sometimes willingly, sometimes under duress, reflecting the complex realities of cultural integration that followed military conquest. Alp Arslan's victory was also immortalized in legend and song. Chroniclers from both sides recorded tales of bravery, cunning, and divine favor, each narrative colored by perspective and bias. In Seljuk accounts, the Sultan became a figure of near-mythical prowess, the commander who turned chaos into triumph and reshaped the destiny of nations. In Byzantine retellings, the tragedy was emphasized. Betrayal, miscommunication, and hubris led to the empire's suffering. The battle, while historical, also took on a mythological dimension, illustrating eternal themes of fate, honor, and the precarious balance between power and vulnerability. Strategically, Manzikert also revealed the growing importance of mobility, intelligence, and psychological warfare in medieval conflict. Static defenses and traditional heavy formations, effective in earlier centuries, were now increasingly vulnerable to armies that could strike quickly, vanish, and strike again. The Seljuks demonstrated how terrain could be weaponized, how feints could manipulate perception, and how morale could determine outcomes as decisively as numbers or weaponry. This lesson, painfully learned by the Byzantines, would resonate through future military doctrines and campaigns, influencing generations of commanders across Eurasia. The capture of Romanost IV, while a personal humiliation, also opened opportunities for negotiation and diplomacy. Alp Arslan's treatment of the emperor was calculated to reinforce Seljuk authority while avoiding unnecessary enmity. This measured approach reflected a broader understanding of governance. Victory on the battlefield must be followed by legitimacy in the realm. By sparing the emperor's life, arranging ransoms, and maintaining a semblance of order, Alp Arslan projected power that was both feared and respected, a duality that would help stabilize his expanding empire. In the months that followed, the ripple effects of Manzikert reshaped political alliances. Neighboring states recalibrated their strategies, some seeking rapprochement with the Seljuks, others reinforcing their own defenses against the possibility of further expansion. Byzantium's weakened eastern frontier became a magnet for opportunistic incursions, and the empire's internal struggles delayed effective countermeasures. Manzikert, far more than a battlefield encounter, had shifted the equilibrium of regional power, ushering in an era in which new forces, once considered peripheral, would dominate the political landscape. The Seljuks, emboldened by victory yet pragmatic in their administration, began consolidating their gains. Strongholds were reinforced, trade networks secured, and local elites incorporated into governance structures. Cultural exchange followed military conquest, as Persian, Turkic, and local Anatolian traditions intermingled. The echoes of Manzikert would not merely be military, they were civilizational, laying the groundwork for centuries of cultural synthesis that would define Anatolia's identity long before the rise of later empires. Thus, Manzikert was more than a clash of armies. It was a crucible of change, where leadership, strategy, ambition, and circumstance intertwined to reshape the Middle East. The battlefield's silence after the combat was deceptive. Its consequences reverberated through cities, courts, and countrysides alike. Soldiers carried the memory of that day in their scars and stories, while rulers recalibrated their ambitions in its shadow. The victory of the Seljuks and the defeat of the Byzantines marked not merely a tactical triumph, but a turning point. A moment when history pivoted and the map of power in Anatolia, and indeed the broader Middle East, was redrawn. Back in Constantinople, the shockwaves of Manzikert tore through the imperial court like a storm through a fragile landscape. The emperor's capture was more than a military disaster. It was a fracture that exposed centuries of tension, intrigue, and ambition simmering beneath the surface of Byzantine governance. Nobles who had long sought to undermine Romanos IV now seized their chance. Factions emerged, each vying for control of the imperial apparatus, whispering accusations of incompetence, betrayal, and even treason. The city, with its towering walls and centuries of grandeur, seemed almost suspended in disbelief, as if the very stones mourned the empire's sudden vulnerability. The Byzantine political system, so carefully structured to balance power between emperor, generals, and the aristocracy, struggled to absorb the shock. Romanos IV's absence left a vacuum, a void into which ambitious relatives and seasoned courtiers eagerly stepped. Some sought to stabilize the empire, advocating reconciliation with rival generals and provincial governors to prevent further incursions. Others saw opportunity in chaos, maneuvering to elevate themselves to positions of authority. Civil war loomed, and the threat of internal collapse rivaled the external threat posed by the Seljuks. The empire's eastern provinces, once the backbone of its economy and military recruitment, teetered on the brink of defection or submission. Meanwhile, Anatolia, the rich heartland of the empire, began its slow transformation under the shadow of Seljuk power. Towns that had flourished under Byzantine protection now faced an uncertain future. Some communities fled westward, abandoning homes that had been in families for generations. Others adapted, negotiating with Seljuk commanders to preserve livelihoods and religious practices. The Seljuks, pragmatic in their governance, often allowed local elites to maintain administrative roles in exchange for loyalty and tribute. This fusion of conquest and administration would become a hallmark of Seljuk rule, demonstrating a capacity not only for warfare, but for governance, integration, and cultural synthesis. As Anatolia shifted under the dual pressures of political fragmentation and new rulership, cultural and demographic transformations quietly began. Persian, Turkic, and local Anatolian traditions converged, influencing architecture, art, trade, and social structures. Caravan routes that had once funneled wealth toward Constantinople now carried goods through Seljuk-controlled corridors. Cities became melting pots where diverse languages and customs mingled. Religious life, too, adapted, as Christian communities negotiated coexistence under Muslim rule, and the seeds of syncretic traditions were sown. These transformations were subtle at first, almost invisible amid the chaos of military conquest, yet they would shape the region's identity for centuries. The legend of Alp Arslan grew in tandem with his political accomplishments. Chroniclers, poets, and storytellers wove his deeds into narratives that blurred history and myth. He became the archetype of the wise and just conqueror, a ruler who combined martial prowess with diplomatic skill. Tales circulated of his calm in battle, his strategic foresight, and his magnanimous treatment of Romanos IV. Stories of his victory at Manzikert were told as lessons in cunning and patience, illustrating how intelligence, courage, and timing could overcome even the mightiest of opponents. Across the Islamic world, his name became synonymous with strategic brilliance and moral authority. In Byzantium, Romanos IV's captivity and eventual return did little to stabilize the empire. His authority had been irreparably weakened, and he faced not only the humiliation of defeat, but the hostility of a court unwilling to forgive failure. The political vacuum triggered a series of internal conflicts, leading to civil wars that consumed resources, attention, and manpower. Generals once loyal to the emperor now pursued their own ambitions, and the cohesion that had allowed Byzantium to dominate Anatolia for centuries began to unravel. This internal turmoil compounded the empire's vulnerability, creating openings for further Seljuk incursions and other opportunistic enemies. Military doctrine in Byzantium also faced a reckoning. The heavy infantry, cataphracts, and rigid formations that had been the backbone of imperial strength proved vulnerable to the fluid, mobile tactics employed by the Seljuks. Horse archers, feigned retreats, and rapid encirclements demonstrated a form of warfare that the Byzantines had not fully mastered. Lessons learned at Manzikert would influence Byzantine military reforms for decades, highlighting the necessity of adaptability, intelligence gathering, and the integration of cavalry and lighter, more mobile units. Yet reform was slow, hindered by internal strife, resource scarcity, and entrenched traditions resistant to change. The psychological impact of the battle extended far beyond the battlefield and the court. Soldiers who survived the rout carried memories of defeat and confusion, stories of comrades lost in moments of chaos, and the humbling realization that numerical superiority and armor could not guarantee victory. These narratives filtered into families, monasteries, and towns, shaping perceptions of military power, loyalty, and leadership. Generations of Byzantines would grow up with the story of Manzikert as a cautionary tale, a symbol of the fragility of even the most enduring empire. Alp Arslan, in contrast, leveraged his triumph to consolidate Seljuk influence and extend administrative control over newly conquered territories. The Seljuk approach to governance combined military oversight with pragmatic diplomacy. Local leaders were incorporated into the administration, tax structures were adapted to existing economic systems, and security forces were deployed to maintain order while preventing rebellion. These measures not only stabilized newly acquired lands, but also facilitated the integration of diverse populations, a crucial factor in transforming temporary victories into lasting dominance. Over the ensuing decades, Anatolia's transformation accelerated. The influx of Turkic populations, combined with Seljuk political and military structures, gradually reshaped the region's social fabric. Former Byzantine strongholds became centers of Islamic culture, learning, and commerce, while new cities and fortresses rose under Seljuk patronage. Trade flourished along established routes, connecting Anatolia to Persia, the Levant, and the broader Islamic world. This period laid the foundations for cultural and economic patterns that would endure through subsequent centuries, creating a landscape where multiple traditions coexisted, clashed, and merged. The mythologizing of Manzikert was as much a product of necessity as of admiration. For the Byzantines, the battle became a symbol of both loss and warning, a narrative in which hubris, betrayal, and failure to adapt led to catastrophe. For the Seljuks, it became a tale of triumph, intelligence, and destiny, illustrating the virtues of strategic vision and moral authority. Over time, these narratives were embellished, retold, and memorialized in chronicles, poetry, and oral histories, ensuring that Manzikert's lessons would echo through generations. The battlefield itself faded into the landscape, but its legacy persisted in collective memory, shaping the identities and ambitions of states and empires that followed. The repercussions of Manzikert extended even beyond immediate political and cultural shifts. The Byzantine vulnerability in Anatolia encouraged other powers, Armenians, Georgians, and smaller principalities, to reconsider allegiances and defensive strategies. The vacuum left by the empire's weakening eastern frontier became a stage for new conflicts, opportunistic incursions, and shifting alliances. The battle's outcome indirectly set the stage for later crusades, influencing both European and Middle Eastern perceptions of power, threat, and opportunity. Strategically, the region had been irrevocably altered, a testament to how a single day of combat could reshape the course of history across decades and continents. Yet amid political maneuvering, cultural integration, and strategic recalibration, the human dimension of Manzikert remained vivid. Soldiers, peasants, and townspeople experienced its consequences not as abstract events, but as lived reality. Families mourned lost sons and fathers, survivors carried the weight of trauma, and communities adapted to new rulers and social structures. This intimate human aspect of the battle underscores the multifaceted nature of historical change. It is at once strategic, political, cultural, and profoundly personal. Through it all, Alp Arslan's figure loomed large, a symbol of conquest tempered by pragmatism, a military genius whose vision extended beyond immediate victory to the foundations of lasting rule. His leadership illustrated the interplay between force and governance, ambition and restraint, strategy and diplomacy. The Seljuk victory at Manzikert was not merely the result of arrows and swords. It was the product of foresight, organization, and the ability to seize the decisive moment while maintaining the cohesion and legitimacy necessary for enduring success. As years passed, the battlefield's echoes continued to resonate. Anatolia became a contested and transformative space, where Byzantine remnants struggled to maintain footholds while Seljuk influence expanded. Villages and cities evolved, trade networks shifted, and new cultural syntheses emerged. Scholars and poets recorded the events in prose and verse, ensuring that Manzikert's story transcended the immediacy of conflict to become an enduring narrative of ambition, strategy, and consequence. The battle's significance was measured not only in lost lives and territories, but in its profound reshaping of the political, social, and cultural landscape of the Middle East. And so Manzikert stands as a testament to the fragility and resilience of empires alike. It illustrates how a single encounter, shaped by strategy, leadership, and circumstance, can alter the destinies of nations. It reminds us that history is not simply the sum of armies and rulers, but the complex interplay of human decisions, ambitions, and adaptations across generations. The Seljuks' rise and Byzantium's struggle encapsulate the eternal dance of power and vulnerability, and in the hills and valleys of eastern Anatolia, the echoes of that fateful day continue to whisper lessons for those who would seek to understand the forces that shape the world. Decades after the clash at Manzikert, the valleys and hills where soldiers had once thundered and clashed lay quiet. Yet the memory of that day lingered like an invisible scar upon Anatolia. The battle had become more than history. It was a prism through which the Middle East would interpret power, ambition, and destiny. The Seljuks, building upon their decisive victory, transformed the eastern landscapes of the Byzantine world. Cities that had once been symbols of Roman order became centers of a new dynamic civilization. Fortresses were repaired, trade routes re-established under Seljuk oversight, and scholars and artisans traveled to cities newly under Seljuk dominion, carrying knowledge, faith, and culture. The land itself seemed to pulse with the transformation, a testament to the profound consequences of a single battle, fought under a scorching Anatolian sun. Alp Arslan's victory solidified his legacy as one of the most formidable military leaders of the medieval world. His genius was not merely in the tactics he employed on the field, but in the vision that extended beyond immediate conquest. While his forces had demonstrated the lethal efficiency of mobility and psychological manipulation, Alp Arslan understood that an empire's strength was measured as much by governance as by swords. Local rulers were integrated into administration, soldiers were garrisoned strategically, and economic and social systems were adapted to maintain stability. His success illustrated the subtle art of leadership, that true power is consolidated not by domination alone, but by foresight, diplomacy, and legitimacy. In Seljuk chronicles, Alp Arslan became the archetype of the conqueror who combined intellect with martial skill, a figure whose example would echo in the campaigns of successors and inspire generations of commanders across Eurasia. For the Byzantine Empire, Manzikert marked a painful turning point. The immediate consequences were political chaos and territorial vulnerability, but the long-term implications were equally profound. The empire's hold over Anatolia weakened irreversibly, opening the door to Seljuk migration, settlement, and influence. Byzantium's once mighty eastern frontier became a mosaic of contested territories, shifting allegiances, and opportunistic incursions. The military lessons of Manzikert forced Byzantium to re-evaluate its strategies, embracing a slow and arduous process of reform, modernization, and adaptation. The empire's heavy reliance on rigid formations, elite infantry, and traditional command structures had been exposed as insufficient in the face of nimble, adaptive opponents. Byzantine leaders now understood that survival required flexibility, intelligence gathering, and a willingness to embrace innovative tactics, even when tradition demanded conformity. Beyond the political and military sphere, Manzikert reshaped the cultural and demographic landscape of Anatolia. The influx of Seljuk populations, combined with the integration of local communities, fostered a fusion of traditions. Persian, Turkic, and Anatolian influences converged, creating vibrant centers of learning, art, architecture, and trade. Mosques, madrasas, and caravanserais emerged alongside churches and monasteries, testifying to the coexistence and sometimes tension of multiple religious and cultural traditions. Markets thrived under new commercial networks that connected Anatolia to Persia, the Levant, and the broader Islamic world. Over time, this blending of cultures would define the region's identity, laying foundations that endured through the rise and fall of successive empires, including the Ottomans. The human stories of Manzikert persisted as well, passed down through generations in both Byzantine and Seljuk societies. Soldiers who had survived carried the memory of loss and valor, of comrades felled in moments of chaos and courage. Families mourned, rebuilt, and adapted to new realities. Chroniclers recorded tales of heroism and betrayal, bravery and despair, immortalizing individuals whose names would otherwise have been lost to time. The narratives evolved into legend. Romanos IV became a cautionary emblem of imperial overreach and vulnerability, while Alp Arslan's triumph was celebrated as the embodiment of strategy, wisdom, and measured power. In this duality, Manzikert assumed a mythological dimension, illustrating timeless lessons about leadership, adaptability, and the fragility of even the mightiest empires. The geopolitical consequences of the battle rippled outward, influencing the strategies of neighboring states and future conflicts. Armenian principalities, Georgian kingdoms, and other regional powers recalibrated their alliances in light of Byzantine weakness. The Seljuks, confident but pragmatic, solidified their hold on Anatolia while remaining wary of overextension. The balance of power in the Middle East had shifted. Byzantium's diminished authority and the Seljuks' rising prominence created conditions that would later motivate the call for crusades, drawing Western Europe into a complex and turbulent theater. In this sense, the echoes of Manzikert resonated far beyond the immediate battlefield, shaping centuries of military, political, and religious dynamics in ways that few contemporaries could have foreseen. At the same time, the battle illuminated the delicate interplay between fate, strategy, and human choice. On one hand, numerical advantage, armor, and centuries of tradition could not guarantee survival. On the other, ingenuity, courage, and the ability to exploit timing and terrain could redefine the destiny of nations. Manzikert became a testament to the idea that history is not merely shaped by grand institutions or dynasties, but by the convergence of circumstance, leadership, and adaptability. It reminded rulers and generals alike that overconfidence and inflexibility can prove as dangerous as any external enemy. Religious and cultural narratives also wove themselves around the battle. In Byzantium, it was interpreted by some as divine punishment, a test of faith, and a symbol of the empire's moral and spiritual vulnerability. In the Islamic world, Alp Arslan's victory was celebrated as both military triumph and fulfillment of a providential destiny, reinforcing narratives of divine favor for righteous leadership and strategic acumen. These interpretations elevated Manzikert beyond a mere clash of armies to a story with spiritual, moral, and philosophical resonance, shaping how societies understood power, legitimacy, and historical causality. As centuries passed, the lessons of Manzikert remained embedded in the consciousness of both conquerors and the conquered. Byzantine historians would study it as a cautionary tale of internal division, leadership miscalculation, and the necessity of adaptation. Seljuk and later Ottoman chroniclers would reflect upon it as a model of strategic foresight, disciplined command, and the integration of victory into sustainable governance. Across the region, the battlefield became a symbol, a touchstone for understanding the fragile balance between ambition and prudence, between force and wisdom. In modern reflection, the Battle of Manzikert is recognized not merely for its immediate military or political outcomes, but for its enduring capacity to illuminate the complex interplay of strategy, culture, leadership, and circumstance. It demonstrates that history is neither linear nor predetermined, but a dynamic, evolving tapestry shaped by human decisions, ambition, and resilience. From the dust of Anatolian plains to the halls of Constantinople, the echoes of that single day have continued to influence generations, reminding us that the consequences of courage, error, and foresight extend far beyond the moment of conflict. The Seljuks' victory, the empire's transformation, and the human stories intertwined in the battle all converge to create a rich tableau of historical meaning. It is a narrative that balances the immediacy of warfare with the gradual shaping of civilizations, where the clash of swords produces not only territorial change, but also the seeds of culture, identity, and enduring myth. Manzikert is thus more than a military encounter. It is a prism through which the broader sweep of history can be understood. A moment when the fate of empires pivoted on decisions made in the chaos of combat, the clarity of leadership, and the tides of circumstance. As the sun sets over the Anatolian hills, centuries after the battle, one can almost hear the echoes of the past, the thunder of hooves, the clash of steel, the cries of soldiers and commanders. Yet beneath the memory of violence lies a deeper resonance, a story of transformation, resilience, and the inexorable flow of history. The Battle of Manzikert reminds us that even in defeat, civilizations are shaped, and even in victory, empires must adapt to endure. It is a testament to the fragility and power of human endeavor, a mirror reflecting both the limits of ambition and the boundless possibilities of vision, courage, and leadership. And so the story of Manzikert continues not as a static monument in the annals of history, but as a living lesson. A reminder that every battlefield is also a crossroads, every leader a potential pivot, and every choice a force capable of shaping the destiny of nations. The Middle East, forever transformed by that single day, carries its legacy in the lands, cities and cultures that emerged in its wake. Alp Arslan's triumph and Romanos IV's defeat remain entwined, bound not only by the events of 1071, but by the enduring narratives they inspired. A battle that changed empires, reshaped identities, and echoed through the centuries, a timeless testament to the intertwining of human ambition, strategy, and destiny.